Okay, welcome back. So now we're going to move and talk a little bit more about human reproduction. That's what the book likes to primarily focus on. So we will go through that part in a little bit more detail. So if you took me for 1408, I've kind of talked to you about this, and it's about sex determination. So this is going to happen about the 7th week of gestation. At this point, everyone's gender neutral. Now, during development, depending if you have the X or Y chromosomes, going to determine if you go down the track of being a male or female. We watched this video in class, or I've had a link for you to watch, and it all comes down to that SRY gene, the SARI gene, that is located on the Y chromosome. And what that gene does is it directs the gonads to direct it down if you're going down the track of become the testes or the ovaries. Now, it's really cool because they have confirmed that this gene is primarily responsible for this because they've taken it to where they have the female mice and they put the SRY gene on one of the X chromosomes and they will develop physically male even though they're XX. And they've confirmed it with males where they remove the SRY gene from an XY male and they develop physically female. So I found that quite cool. I just wanted to mention it again because if you haven't forgot, I think it's really interesting. And if you want that link to the video, just let me know and I can send it to you. So they go through a little bit about the male and the female anatomy, and I'll hit on the major parts. I'm not going to drill it into your head because you can read. So the testes, this is where most of the sperm production, or all of it's going to occur, just to be exact. Now, this is going to be located externally from the body in the scrotum because sperm production is difficult at high temperatures. So we have to keep them outside the body cavity. So you've heard about the debate of boxers versus briefs. That's one thing they might ask if you have an infertility problems. Now, one thing to know, cryptorchism is what happens when the testes fail to descend, and that can lead to sterility because they are constantly kept in a high and heated environment. Now, you're going to have, within the testicle, you're going to have this epididymis that's going to be outside of it. It's this coiled tube outside each testes, and this is where the sperm are going to mature. They're going to be made and mostly mature here in the seminiferous tubules, and I'll show you that on the next slide, but they're going to mature here in the epididymis, and then they're going to leave out through the vas deferens. It's a tube running from the testes to the urethra. What happens during vasectomies is they cut the vas deferens to prevent conception. So you're still making sperm, you're just not connecting all the tubes. Now, as I mentioned, sperm are produced in the seminiferous tubules. So if I go back one real quick, all this part right here. So if I took a cross section of one of these little tubules, this is what it would look like, right? So in your seminiferous tubule, on the outside, you have a population called the spermatogonial stem cell population that is constantly there. Also, close to these cells, you're going to have what we call Sertoli and Leydig cells, and they help with development. Now, your spermatogonial stem cell population, they go through this decision where they can either self-renew or differentiate. If they self-renew, they just stay a stem cell. If they differentiate, they're committing to the process to become a sperm, which I will talk about in a few slides. But you see this kind of open area right here. Well, as the sperm goes through the process of differentiation, it's going to go through several mitotic and meiotic divisions, and it's going to get to this internal part here. And this internal part is where the kind of immature sperm are going to be located, and then we'll move to the seminiferous tubule, to the epididymis to complete maturation. Now, if you look at the parts of a sperm, there's the head, and this is where we're going to have the nucleus with all the DNA, and it's going to be covered in some enzymes that help protect it. Also, these enzymes will help it penetrate the egg for fertilization. It's going to have a tail to use for swimming, and then it's going to have this middle part that's going to have all the mitochondria for the energy. Now, what's some interesting numbers? There's about 40 million sperm per milliliter of ejaculate, and of all that goes through, only 100 of them actually reach the egg, so it's survival of the fittest, I guess. The rest just don't survive the journey through the body. Sad for them. A little bit more about the male anatomy. So we're going to store the sperm in the epididymis. down here, and the vas deferens until they are used. So during arousal, sperm is going to enter the urethra. So we're going to following the tubes all the way around, and then that's going to enter into the penis. Now that's your organ. It's going to be in front of your scrotum, and it's filled with your erectile tissue. So when it fills with blood, it causes the erection. Erectile dysfunction drugs, they kind of help increase that blood flow to the penis to increase ability to have an erection. Viagra, actually, weird story, was actually a heart medication, and this was just a happy side effect that they found with it. Now, your composition of semen is the sperm containing fluid produced by glands around your urethra. You have different glands that produce different things to help along with it. Now, ejaculation will happen at peak sexual arousal. What's happening is you're having contractions that are happening in both the epididymis and the vas deferens, and that's going to force the penis out of the tip of the penis. And this is often accompanied by the orgasm. Now, once this is done, you enter the refractory period where nothing can happen for quite a while, unless you are amazing. Now, your female anatomy, kind of break it up into your external and your internal structures. Your external structures will be your breasts that contain your mammary glands, which are essential for production of milk. And then we have your vulva. And part of your vulva, we're going to have the clitoris, which is pretty much your erectile tissue, very important for sensory function. And the labia majora and minora, pretty much just folds. And then you're going to have some vestibular glands, that are essential for lubrication. You then have your internal structures, what happens to be your ovaries, which are your egg-producing organs. You're going to have your fallopian tubes that are going to help carry those little eggs that are produced, your immature oocytes, from the ovaries to the uterus. The uterus is your thick muscular organ that's going to hold the embryo during gestation. You have a cervix, which is at the narrow end of the uterus. You have your endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus, and that's what's shed during the process of menstruation. And then you have your vagina, which is your tube leading from the uterus out of the body. And that's just the baby chute where it goes out. So a little bit about your ovary. We are going to go through and cut through half of it. Now this is where we're going to introduce a few terms. So the term oocytes. So these are your eggs that you produced. And we produce them into what we call little follicles. And this was done through the process of meiosis. These are your gametes. The follicles are going to provide nourishment and protection for your little eggs. Now, before birth, as I mentioned, girls, that we are overplanners, we made all of them before birth, and then they just kind of rest at a stage of meiosis. By the time we hit puberty, we only have about 300,000 to 400,000 left, and totally only about 400 mature and get ovulated. I don't know why we make so many and they just go to waste. I don't know. It's just one of those things about biology we just don't understand. Now, the process you're going to see is you're going to have a follicle, and through every month, it alternates between ovaries. You're going to have them kind of go through, have a primary, they're going to develop into a secondary stage, and then a tertiary, and eventually that follicle kind of reaches the outside of the ovary. And the process of ovulation is that follicle kind of like bursting and releasing that egg into the fallopian tube. So people talk about having cysts on follicles. It can be our cyst on your ovaries is quite painful. I can account for that from personal experience. That's one thing I have to deal with. But basically, ovulation is just a release of the egg. We're not going through and shoving it down this little track right here. It's being released and into the fallopian tubes that's then carried down to the uterus. After that, the remaining part of the follicle kind of goes into what's called a corpus luteum, and that eventually degrades into the corpus albicans and is broken down within the ovary and absorbed back in. So a little bit more about the process of spermatogenesis and oogenesis. I'm not going to go in extreme detail. I'm going to pull myself back, like I said. So if you took that cross-section of the seminiferous tube, I'll mention that you have your spermatogonial stem cell population on the outside part. So what they're going to do is they're going to decide if they're going to self-renew to remain a stem cell or commit to go through differentiation and become a sperm. What's going to happen is once they commit to the differentiation process, they're going to go through mitosis. Now, what this figure is not showing is they actually undergo multiple rounds of mitosis. One example is in the mouse. So due to clonal amplification from multiple rounds of mitosis, one spermatogonium will produce 8,194 sperm. That's just fascinating. From one cell, you're going to get 8,000 sperm. It's due to this clonal amplification that happens. Now it's going to enter the primary spermatocyte stage, and then it's going to go 2 rounds of meiosis, to eventually where it becomes a spermatid. Now, the closer it gets to the center of the seminiferous tubule, the more mature the sperm is. So it's kind of like an immature state right here, and then eventually goes to the epididymis for further maturation. Now, oogenesis, just like that, where the oogoniums are going to go through several rounds of mitosis. Now, your primary oocytes are going to be arrested in prophase 1 prior to birth. They just hang out there. Now, once puberty comes, and hormones will trigger the release of a number of follicles, and this will continue all throughout until you enter menopause. Now, what's going to happen when it comes time for that follicle to be called up? It's going to undergo and complete meiosis 1. And what's going to happen is it's going to divide into 2 cells. Half of it's going to go into what's called a polar body, and that's never going to become an egg. It's pretty much going to be absorbed back in the body. The secondary oocyte is what's going to be ovulated. Now, this is still a haploid cell right here. So this goes through the process of ovulation. It's released. Now, if it is fertilized, it will complete the second round of meiosis. If it's not fertilized, it just pretty much stays as it is and just is released from the body. So it's only the process of fertilization that completes the second round of meiosis, and then that will then trigger the formation of fertilization with the egg and the sperm. So next up is a little bit about hormones and how this is all controlled. If you remember the endocrine system, we did mention a little bit about them, and feedback loops are coming back to haunt you. So the anterior pituitary gland is going to produce the hormones FSH and LH, which are follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. They're the same hormones in males and females, but they have different effects on the body. So this is the effect on the male first. Now, FSH is going to promote sperm production in the seminiferous tubule, and LH is going to control production of testosterone around the tubules. So these are both going to be triggered by the hormone GnRH, is released by the hypothalamus. So remember, hypothalamus is like the regulatory center. That's going to release this hormone, and that causes FSH and LH to be released, and then they're going to go and target the testes. Now, testosterone can go back and have a positive feed loop and initiate more of spermatogenesis to occur. Now, once these levels reach certain higher levels, we can actually have a negative loop happen. So testosterone can also slow down production of GnRH, or we can actually use inhibin our testosterone to tell the anterior pituitary to, hey, slow down right here. So you can have both the positive and negative feedback loop happen. Now, testosterone is super important for male development, necessary for sperm production. That's why you see the positive feedback loop, and help for maintenance of your secondary sex characteristics. Now, too much can be bad. That's why we have the negative feedback loops that we have right there. As I mentioned, girls, we're just complicated. We just really are. Now, the anterior pituitary gland is also going to produce the same hormones. So remember, FSH and LH. So FSH is going to promote development of the follicles, and that's going to lead to production of estrogen. That's going to lead to ovulation. So if you kind of map this car right here, you can see like the different levels and how they're all kind of responding to each other. We're going to break it up into follicular phase and luteophase, and I'm sorry it got kind of fuzzy right there. It's probably even fuzzier when you're watching the video because it just distorts PDF so much. But you have the file, PDF file that you can look at. Now, LH is going to promote the secretion of progesterone, which is going to lead and cause menstruation. Now, if you do not have pregnancy, the menstruation is going to purge the endometrium. So if you kind of look at the process of the menstrual cycle, days 1 through 5, everything's kind of at low levels. Everything's kind of keeping low. You're going to have the endometrium disintegrate. You go through the process of menses, and just pretty much bleeding. Now, days 6 through 13, we're going to start to see estrogen start to increase. We're starting to go up with the gray line right there. What that's doing is causing the endometrium to start to thicken and all the other stuff. Now, day 14, we start to see LH spike. We see estrogen spiking too. Boom. And then they go down. That's when ovulation happens. Once those two go down, you see progesterone kind of tick up. So this is going to cause the endometrium to double in thickness, start to secrete that mucus, and that means the egg is kind of hanging around out here, waiting to see if it's going to get fertilized. If we do not have fertilization at this point, boom, everything just repeats over and over again. Now, estrogen is super important for female development, helps promote function with the sex organs and a lot of female characteristics. So that's it. I understand. Looks super complicated. Like I said, ladies, we are a lot of work. So finally, I'm going to wrap it up with gestation. So remember, fertilization occurs when the sperm penetrates the plasma membrane of an oocyte. Now, there are checks and balances that happen. So if multiple sperm try to enter the egg, it's going to come viable because you have an odd number of chromosomes. And the way that the egg kind of prevents this from happening is it has proteins to prevent multiple sperm from entering it. It kind of goes through. This video is going to talk about pregnancy tests, and I think I might have one on another slide that talks about this process right here. It might be in the next development slide. But just kind of going through right here, we have the process of ovulation. The oocyte will go through its release in the fallopian tube, and if it's going through the process of fertilization right here, it will then form a zygote, and then it's going to undergo several rounds of mitotic division before it forms the blastocyst, which I'll talk about in the next lecture, and then it will be implanted into the uterus. Now, during early development, the first 2 weeks, this is where we're about to enter the endometrium, and then we'll go through implantation. So I will talk about the stages of this in the next lecture. Now, how can we tell if you are pregnant? Well, one way is we start to see production of the HCG hormone, and that's what we use to detect on pregnancy tests. So this is a little TED Talk talking about how that hormone is recognized. About the 3rd week, we start to see the amniotic fluid form, and we're starting to see more of embryonic development start happening. So we're going to start to see the tissue start to differentiate. You're going to have the different tracts forming, and we're going to start to see the initial nervous system forming. And then we'll start to see the blood vessels start to form too. About 5 to 6 weeks, you're going to start to see some limb buds, the arms and legs, and start to get some cephalization. And then, as I mentioned at the very beginning, about 6 to 7 weeks, we're going to have the sex determination process if you have that SRY gene expressed on your Y chromosome. About 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to start to look distinctly human, about 20 millimeters long. Pretty much your nervous system is basically functioning. All organ systems are pretty much established, but you're not functioning, which is at that top image right here. Now, it's important to remember that we are placental animals. So at this point, we are connected by your umbilical cord to your mother, and the placenta is going to allow nutrient and waste exchange through the body, through the mother. Blood never directly crosses the placenta, but bad thing, remember, drugs and medicines and pathogens can cross, so that's why they tell expectant mothers to really watch what they drink and consume. So this bottom image is just entering into the 2nd semester. And then finally we get to most of the fetal development will happen between the 3rd to 9 months. It's going to increase in size dramatically, and we'll develop our fine features. We'll get more and more specific. About the 10th week, you can start to hear the heartbeat. And then earliest you can probably be born and survive will be about week 22. Now, birth, when the fetal brain is sufficiently mature, its hypothalamus will actually release androgens into the bloodstream, which will cross the placenta to actually trigger labor. So it's a kid telling you, I'm ready to come out. Sometimes those kids don't want to come out, so then you have to actually go through induced labor. So with this, you're going to see estrogen, oxytocin, prostaglandin cause uterine contractions that are going to cause the fetus to be expelled. So you can break it up into 3 main stages where the water breaks. You're going to have the baby born, you have to cut the umbilical cord, and then you have to deliver the afterbirth. So we're not going to watch a video on that, but I'm pretty sure they're out there if you want to. So here are some more review videos about all the stuff that we talked about, and then credit for the images.